Good.
All right, everybody. So, we're talking about one of the important things that Log Cabin does is we build bridges within the party, amongst the party. You know, we have all types in our organization. I know that there's a reputation as Log Cabin as a modern organization, but we're a lot of things. We're a conservative organization. We're a modern organization. We're a libertarian organization. We have social conservatives, we have fiscal conservatives, we have social moderates, we have fiscal moderates. We have a wide range of membership, a wide range of participation, and a lot of people who come around the common unified message that we should have a more inclusive Republican Party. So one of the ideas when coming together was talking about one of the very unique factions of the party that has shown a real independent streak when it comes to issues regarding the LGBT community, and that is the libertarian faction. And so I wanted to put together a panel of 4 individuals who I thought would represent different parts of that movement, who are liberty-identified people, and kind of talk about the issues of what makes up a Liberty Republican and how that relates to our organization. Okay, so I'm just going to go down the line and introduce everybody, or I'll let them introduce themselves.
Felicia Cravens was formerly Houston Tea Party Society, involved in a bunch of other stuff since then.
Corie Stephens. I've been involved with a lot of different liberty organizations. I've been on the Tea Party side. I've been on the board of the Republican Liberty Caucus. I've worked for specifically mostly youth outreach organizations from a liberty perspective, and I've also been involved with the Republican Party going to state conventions, etc. So I'm excited to be here, and yeah.
John Baucum, I'm the president of the Houston Young Republicans and the political director of Republicans Against Marijuana Prohibition. So with RAMP, we also get a little bit of that political outsiderness, similar to the Log Cabin. And you know, I think it's important that we fight for the fundamental reasons of individual liberty, you know, small government that Republicans espouse, and we can both support our singular type issues on those factions, and as Chris said, you know, work with the party as a larger whole on a whole host of other types of issues.
I'm Jeff Larson. I was a 2012 delegate at the Republican National Convention, and my vote was pledged for Ron Paul. And I'm also the chairman of the Texas chapter of the Republican Liberty Caucus, and I'm very pleased to announce that as of today, our membership has passed Idaho's to become the largest in the state. I just got word of that this morning, so I'm pretty pleased about that. We'll be heading into our national convention, the RLC National Convention, in New Hampshire later this year. And I'm also active at the local level. I'm currently the vice chair of SD11 here in the Republican Party in Harris County.
Okay, so I just wanted to start off with a quick, 30-second, 1 minute. What does it mean to be a liberty or a libertarian Republican?
Well, we all can pretty much agree it's meaning that you're an outcast. Because people don't think about liberty anymore. It's not a present issue in their lives anymore. You really have to put a lot of pressure on a person to make them realize that they have lost something in the way of liberty. And those of us who eat it and breathe it and talk it and use it as a second language, we're freaks. 90% of the people out there in the world don't think about those things as often or as deeply as we do, and we're not taught to do so at school or whatever. So I'm a self-identified liberty freak. I'm cool with that. I did not start out that way. I've been a 17-year political active person in the Republican Party, but I've been working liberty from it for maybe 6 or 7 years. So even the people that are die-hard, red meat Republican types that don't really think about these things can be moved. It happened to me. So now that I've come there, I've become an evangelist for that viewpoint as well.
I think for me, being a Liberty Republican, as I said in my introduction, I've done a lot in terms of the youth movement. I used to be a regional director down here in Houston for Young Americans for Liberty, working with young libertarian students on college campuses. I'm one of the people in the Liberty movement who believes in working within the Republican which narrows me down. You know, Felicia said talk about being an outsider. Of course, that's a whole battle within the liberty/libertarian movement as to whether we should even work in the GOP. So, you know, I'm called a liberal by conservatives. I'm called a conservative freak by liberals. I mean, that's just what you get when you strike out kind of a more libertarian-leaning position. I'm also, of course, called a statist by libertarians. You know, you can't win. But I think that also the message of liberty and an inclusive message resonates. I also think, too, that I see myself as an advocate for younger Republicans. I think that there is something to be said of the younger generation of Republicans. And I know Log Cabin works on LGBT issues. I think that all young Republicans are more, you know, open to social tolerance. And it's not to say that a lot of older ones aren't too. They absolutely are. But I think that's been one of the divides you see between maybe some of the Tea Party factions and the Liberty factions. You know, I got involved in the Tea Party movement very early on. I'm originally from Boston. And in 2009, I did the whole Tea Party thing there. And I always tell the Tea Party groups, I think one of the things they're going to need to do if you want to reach out to young people is agree to disagree on some level of those social issues. And so I think you see that, and I think we see a lot of younger Republicans, whether they're moderate or more liberty, coming together on a lot of issues. And I like that Big Ten approach, even if I might identify more as a liberty Republican. So that's one of my perspectives.
You know, and I think as Liberty Republicans, we kind of all agree that most of what the government does, they do poorly, and many of those things they probably shouldn't be doing at all on a constitutional basis. To follow up on kind of the points they made, you know, as being part of the Liberty movement, I think that we're not afraid to stand on principle against the establishment or the majority of the Republican Party. And it's kind of a double-edged sword. Jeff, who's been in the movement for a lot longer than I have, for the young people, you know, also coming in from the libertarian side and being young, you know, they kind of just want to tell you to sit down and shut up and go in the corner. But through your work ethic and your resilience and proving your worth to the party, they're able to see that maybe there is value from us. Me specifically, I work for a technology company, so we do geographic information systems. So a lot of people just, their eyes glaze over when we start talking about using technology. That's something that the left has been very successful at for years. They're miles and miles ahead of us, integrating big data and data analysis into their campaigns. I work with Paul Simpson on his campaign, the new Harris County GOP chairman, and they actually have a lot of the maps that I created analyzing voter trends and precinct chairs in Harris County hanging up in the headquarters. So I think although we come in as outsiders and some people would rather us just kind of go away, as we stay involved, and as Corie mentioned, some people that's a kind of a schism we have within the movement is it worth our time to work within the GOP for change, or should we abandon it and let it just literally die away? But I don't think we can do that. I think that we have enough power and we're right on most of the positions, and so we can really sway the GOP into a more libertarian aspect, really focus on individual liberty, limited government, and fiscal responsibility. So I think that's where we're going. I think we've been successful, and I think with groups like this and groups like the Young Republicans working together, there's opportunity for tremendous growth there.
I'd like to echo something Corie and also Felicia said, and that's, I have a saying that goes, it's not a good day on the internet unless you've been called both a dope-smoking hippie and a Nazi statist, and that kind of, that's my experience. So, you know, one of the things that really I take heart in is when I first started ramping up in this, my political involvement, I've been in the party and a precinct chair ever since the 80s. But it wasn't until about 2008 that I really caught fire and really started becoming much more active and becoming an effective advocate for liberty causes. And it was tough sledding at first, and I had a lot of people who knew my face but hadn't heard me speak, and when they heard me speak, they started thinking, well, oh, he's one of them. And so there was a lot of getting up the ramp and a lot of convincing people that, yeah, I really didn't have a third eye in the middle of my forehead, and I really do have some useful practical things that you can take with you and build into a platform and build into something that will attract more voters. That's one thing that really heartens me about the Liberty Movement. All through getting up that ramp and getting acceptance within the party, And believe me, there were a lot of naysayers that said you're wasting your time in the GOP. Those people don't want you. And well, we've all kind of learned to accommodate each other. And if you just look at the kind of dialogue that's going on in the presidential campaign right now, we're discussing issues now that are at the forefront of you know, the questions that are going to be asked when we have the debates. The subjects that are going to be discussed are things that were unthinkable 8 years ago. And I think that's just a sign of progress, and I'm very heartened by it, and I'm very optimistic about the future of where the Republican Party is going with respect to relearning respect for liberty.
Okay, so I'll take one of those issues that I think that where the liberty movement has seen a strong shift within the Republican Party, and that was, I think we've seen a growing minority of Republicans dissenting on things like the Patriot Act and domestic spying. So I'm going to start with Corie. What do you have to say about the NSA surveillance programs, the Rand Paul's filibuster on the Patriot Act? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's very fascinating. I think there are some twofold issues when it comes to surveillance. I think that, unfortunately, polling tends to show that when a Democratic president is in power, Democrats support surveillance, and when a Republican president is in power, Republicans tend to support surveillance. It's sort of a knee-jerk, reaction to, do I trust this individual person? But I think, regardless of how you feel about Edward Snowden, and I have mixed feelings on it myself, I think that the revelations that he exposed started a dialogue that we couldn't have had, and that in a way, it gave libertarians more of a seat at the table, because a lot of libertarians have been saying this is a problem, and we were the only ones saying that, and other people sort of were forced to recognize, okay, yes, this is a problem, we may not agree entirely, but let's fight for some reforms. And libertarians, I think, have a different opinion on some of the reforms that have been passed. The USA Freedom Act is now in law. It was originally written to pretty much entirely eliminate bulk collection of data, to the dismay of some libertarians, and others had a different approach to whether or not it went far enough. But a lot of the reforms were watered down. Rand Paul actually ended up voting against the bill because he felt it was too watered down. But other people who are somewhat libertarian leaning on surveillance, such as Senator Mike Lee from Utah, and even Senator Ted Cruz here, is not for surveillance in the way that, say, maybe a John McCain or Lindsey Graham is. So I think you're seeing some movement, although I would argue that maybe the reforms are insufficient, but I think libertarians are still pushing back and have a seat at the table. You see an interesting bipartisan kind of divide on this too. You have Thomas Massie and Zoe Lofgren, one being a Republican and another being a Democrat, with an amendment that passed the House, but then the reforms didn't get in through the Senate. So it's an interesting bipartisan divide, and I think libertarians have had influence on both Democrats and Republicans in that regard, and I see that as a positive step in the right direction.
Okay, Jeff, you've spent a lot of time in GOP conventions and with GOP delegates. What would you say? How would you say most Republicans who are involved in the party process react when you talk about surveillance issues? They kind of divide into two groups, and one group is I would call them the McCain Republicans maybe, and they tend to agree with him that anything, our personal safety comes first. I'll give up anything for my personal safety, because if the terrorists get you, you got nothing. And that's one viewpoint. It happens to be pretty much the opposite of my viewpoint. And the other group, they'll sit there and they'll listen to you, and as you start really explaining what the surveillance state does and how much of your personal information it has available to it, they come around pretty quickly, and they're really interested in what could we do to stop this or roll this back, or in some way build down that surveillance state and get a little bit of our privacy back. Okay. All right.
I have one thing I wanted to add on that.
Sure.
You know what made me a skeptic about national security surveillance at the NSA level? Enemy of the State. It was a film, it wasn't a person, it was Will freaking Smith. And that is very important. I'm kidding. Think of how our culture helps define our political views and how we can use conversations like that. They just put Sandra Bullock's The Net on Netflix. Guess who watched it? Because I'm weird like that, but I'm always looking for material to use to share with people who don't eat, breathe, and sleep politics. And it's how I got that viewpoint that I hold on this issue. Culture matters, and when we talk about the details of these plans, people's eyes glaze over. If you can tell them how Gene Hackman was totally going to do that Will Smith in, if he didn't do what he wanted, people get it. It's still in the realm of fantasy, but even Hollywood understood and recognized the threats. We need to use those tools that they give us.
John, do you have anything to add to that conversation?
Well, I would just expand, the government surveillance is not making us safer. Things through the Patriot Act, like the creation of the TSA, is not making people safer in airports. They've shown through every study that they've ever done that they're able to slip in all sorts of illegal substances and packages.
It failed 95% of tests.
95% of the tests failed. So, I think something that's thrown at us, specifically with the marijuana legalization argument, or even decriminalization, is everybody says it's a slippery slope. Well, I think it's a slippery slope when you give government the power of surveillance to collect data en masse without warrants, without probable cause. The only way government can make you safe is if you're a total slave of the government. And I think we can all agree that we don't want that. So I would, some people will debate whether what Edward Snowden did was correct or not. But it definitely opened up, especially in our kind of flash news media cycle, they were able to keep putting out enough information to where it really did drive the conversation home and allowed people to have a much larger conversation about it than most of the government would have preferred.
All right, kind of moving on to another topic which often divides libertarians and traditional Republicans. And I'm going to start off with Jeff here at the end. Us, head of the state RLC, I think one of the biggest divides you see is on foreign policy. And a lot of traditional Republicans don't agree with the libertarian view of foreign policy. What would you say the distinctions are between the libertarian foreign policy worldview and the traditional Republican worldview?
Well, the first thing I want to say about that is I believe, and I hate to use the term libertarian foreign policy, but let's just call it a more liberty-oriented foreign policy. A lot of the people view it incorrectly. They pretend that it's something that it's not. What you'll hear is it's isolationism. It's a complete withdrawal from the world. And that's simply not true. Our problem is that we have hundreds of military bases around the world. I would like to see a good, cogent argument that we could not preserve and protect U.S. interests overseas with dozens of military bases instead of hundreds. And that's really what the divide is. But people will try to cast that in a different way and try to say, oh, well, you're making things more dangerous for America because when we withdraw our troops, which is what you want to do, which is false, when you withdraw all your troops and keep them just in America, on the mainland and no place else, that means our enemies can get to us. Well, that's not a realistic approach to foreign policy. But what is realistic is to look at the budget and say, we can't keep doing this. And if we keep trying to spend more money than we have, the day we run out is the day we have to make a decision whether we write paychecks for our troops or Social Security checks for our elderly people. And, it is simply not viable to protect the United States security to put us in that box. So really the libertarian approach is to rescope our goals and our concept of how the world works in such a way that we can operate a military that we can afford to operate.
Yeah. I think, and libertarianism too, like every other ideological movement, sort of has its own spectrum. I like to say that libertarianism really does have its own left-right spectrum. And I tend to consider myself more on the libertarian right. I actually used to be more of a neoconservative, more moderate, and moved toward a liberty position, actually mainly because of foreign policy. I've always been more socially moderate, but I think it was foreign policy that finally moved me toward identifying more as a libertarian. And the reason I say that is because I started to realize that a lot of the cliches surrounding it were not actually true. You could delve in and look at the history and see that a lot of people, claim that Reagan was neoconservative, but when you read the history and you see some of the statements, you actually see some of the more ideological neoconservatives that were advisors in the Bush administration. They attacked Reagan for being too weak, for example, when he withdrew troops from Lebanon. So it's a more complicated history, I think, than some of the sound bites, actually provide. And there's a lot of interesting debate you can have about this, a lot of research to do, but I think that we've seen a degree of overreaching foreign policy in the past decade and a half or so that have led people to start reconsidering things. And I'm glad that this debate's happening in the Republican Party. What I hope is that more maybe moderate Republicans and neoconservative Republicans can entertain some more libertarian arguments from an intellectually honest perspective, like Jeff said. Are there some libertarians who are total isolationists? Yes, and I don't agree with them. I think that they're wrong, and I would tend to maybe put them more on the left side of the libertarian spectrum. I think most right-leaning libertarians are realists, which is an intellectual tradition that's been common in the Republican Party if you look up the history. So I think that the more rational, reasonable libertarian position on this has a history in the Republican Party, and I think we should have the intellectually honest debate, and I think we are, and that's a good thing.
Yeah, I think if we want to talk about the neoconservative position on intervention, it's very short-sighted, and a lot of them just want to sort of jump into any conflict anywhere around the world at any time. And we've sort of seen that story before, and it's never proved effective for us in the long term, whether that be financially or even for the nation or the people that we're supposedly going to be helping. Last summer there was a heated debate about whether or not we should get involved in the civil war in Syria, and there was actually a vote about training rebels, bringing some rebels to Saudi Arabia, training them with U.S. resources and sending them back into the Civil War. And we actually had a meeting here at this restaurant with Congressman Ted Poe, who actually represents this area, and he actually voted against this, which I thought, for a Texas Republican, he was one of the few that didn't vote just to go into another war and let's keep propelling this this interventionism. And so I thanked him for it, and he said, yeah, we've seen that happen in places like Iraq, where we've trained and given resources and money to one day a person that's sort of a moderate rebel, and the next day they turn around and they're a terrorist attacking the American forces. And so I asked him, I said, well, that's great. And he said, so we don't need boots on the ground in Syria. And I said, that's great, but the CIA, and through back channels, they've had boots on the ground, they've been supplying arms, they've been funding this civil war already in Syria. And he admitted that that was true and that was wrong. And so in my opinion, from the liberty side of the foreign policy equation, that should be national news that you have a Republican congressman saying that CIA interventionism in a foreign civil war is wrong and that we shouldn't be doing that. And unfortunately, it just happened kind of in our small room. I don't think he was just pandering to kind of the crowd that was in the room, which he knew was against that. But that's the type of policy stances that we need to have that get out into the broad public, so people don't just peg us as nation-building interventionists who want to go start a war everywhere around the world and everybody disagrees with us. So I think that there is an ability to get more of a libertarian kind of approach to foreign policy, even among some of the people who we wouldn't necessarily think agree with us. We can kind of show the history and the long-term track record of those types of policies.
Military, foreign policy, all that is way above my pay grade, but it's a scary world out there. I understand that we need some framework to protect us as much as possible, but still allowing us to be free, to have our freedoms, to not feel that the government is reporting and taking note of everything. Again, Will Smith, I'm paranoid about my own government and the power that they can have. They're more likely to do damage to me in the long run than someone overseas. That's the way we stand right now. It's a scary world. Again, I don't know how we square that circle, but I know that there's ways that we could do foreign policy in a more intelligent way. For instance, one of the reasons that Greece is falling apart right now financially is because this whole European Union didn't have to provide as much of their own national security because of all the, how many bases are there? If they had to actually fund their own defense and deal with those things, we might see a different array of our forces. Those are the things I think about. What are we allowing other countries to do, and how irresponsible are we allowing them to be by being their backstop? That's what worries me, and we're bankrolling it by borrowing it from China, which, you know, how long is that going to last? Are those guys going to call that note after this week? It's possible. When your foreign policy is dependent upon who you owe money to, that's scary. I don't like that.
Kind of switching back to a more domestic topic, I'm going to throw this one to John here because he knows where I'm going. It's been, you know, spiking up in the news. It's been hitting a political stride lately where, you know, it's been plateaued for, you know, decades. Marijuana legalization. So.
Yeah, so next to log cabins and kind of the LGBT rights issues, marijuana might just be the most, second most controversial issue within the GOP. A lot of that is just because of the history of indoctrination and propaganda that's been thrown out as, you know, the devil's weed, and if you smoke marijuana, you're going to go out and commit crimes, and a lot of it has, you know, its roots in racism. And so we are seeing a cultural shift, definitely in the younger generations of the GOP, really focused on, even if they don't support marijuana necessarily or even care to use it, just in the aspect of, I'm an individual, government leave me alone. If I'm not harming another individual and I'm not committing any other crime, why should it be the business of the government what type of plant substance I want to use? So again, to focus as RAMP, Republicans Against Marijuana Prohibition, we come at the legalization debate quite differently than a lot of traditional marijuana reform groups. You know, we are Republicans. I'm a precinct chair. I'm active in the Republican Party. And as Republicans, we truly believe in individual liberty, small government, and fiscal responsibility. And the war on drugs fundamentally goes against all three of those principles. It's a massive failure in every way that you look at it. In Texas alone, we arrest over 72,000 individuals a year just for small amounts of marijuana possession. It's a tremendous cost to our court system, which the judge can tell you more about. In Texas, just possession of one joint up to 2 ounces is a Class B misdemeanor. So Class B misdemeanor right now is punishable by up to 6 months in jail, $2,000 fine, but worse than those, it actually stays on your record for the rest of your life. So if you have federal financial aid, you automatically lose it. If you're looking at housing assistance, you're not going to be eligible. If you go to rent an apartment and they see a Class B conviction on your record, there's a strong chance that they're going to deny your application. Driver's license. So it's just a tremendous effect, not only on the stigma getting arrested and going in the jail cell for 24, 48 hours, but also the long-term effects that follow you around for the rest of your life. And we have seen a lot of quiet support from a lot of the representatives this session. We worked really hard to push some reforms. We weren't looking at legalization in Texas. We were focused on decriminalization. And we got a lot of quiet support from a lot of the Republicans in both the House and the Senate, but nobody, except for David Simpson, who actually introduced a bill that went through the statutes, and everywhere the word marijuana existed, basically struck it out. So in Colorado, they've done, you know, legalized marijuana like alcohol. His would have basically legalized marijuana like tomatoes or jalapenos. So he went quite a bit farther than anybody had, and that was very bold for him to do that, coming out of a very conservative Tea Party type district up in the Longview, Tyler area. And we just don't have enough people that are ready to kind of make that commitment to say our policy is a failure, prohibition is a big government socialist experiment of the government trying to control individuals' lives, and we really should reject that.
I'm going to go next to, who do I want to go next to? Who wants to take this next?
This issue?
Yeah, this
I
issue.
can take this issue, yeah. So I'm probably the only libertarian under 30 who's never smoked weed, like honestly. But I support legalization because really of the issues that John has stated. I don't think you need to be utilizing marijuana to look at it from a criminal justice perspective. You know, I mentioned before with surveillance, you see a really fascinating Democratic and Republican alignment. And I think you see the same thing when it comes to the war on drugs and criminal justice reform. You know, actually our former governor, Rick Perry, has seen a lot positive in terms of criminal justice reform. And it's fascinating, actually. People think of Texas as being such a law and order state, and compared to others, I think that that's fair to say. But when you look at the Texas Public Policy Foundation out there in Austin, and you have Mark Levin and some of the people there who are working on the Right on Crime initiative, you start to see that some of these policy initiatives to really reform the criminal justice system in a way that's more fair, that's more conservative from a fiscal standpoint, and that doesn't hurt people and actually create a stigma where people are not allowed to work in their careers and have a job and become entrepreneurs. Right now, as John was saying, you create this stigma and you ruin people's lives over smoking a little bit of weed. That seems insane. It's really cost taxpayers more money, and it doesn't make sense. And I think that people are seeing that, both Democrats and Republicans. And I don't think you have to condone the use of marijuana or use it yourself to recognize that there are steps we can take to make it easier for people who, maybe made a youthful mistake. You see Rand Paul and Corie Booker being the Democratic senator from New Jersey. They spent time essentially going on tours together, explaining why, from a liberal perspective and a conservative perspective, that criminal justice reform is important. And so I think that it's another thing where we're seeing some progress and that libertarians have contributed to the discussion.
John, anything to add?
I certainly do. I'd like to say, first of all, I'd like you all to join me in applauding John here, because I don't know anybody in this room, and probably nobody within a mile radius or more, who has spent more time and effort in the last 6 months trying to work for marijuana legalization and legalization of medical marijuana in Texas than the man sitting to my left. John, my hat's off.
I just will, real quick, I just want to mention a couple other people. Ann Lee is our founder. She's an 85-year-old Republican, long time. This is her issue, it's her passion. Also Zoe Russell. Zoe actually moved up to Austin to be in the Capitol every day of the legislative session. Jason Miller, he's the president of Houston Normal, very instrumental in the foundation of RAMP and helping us, in funding to go to. We went to the Liberty Political Action Conference up in D.C. We tabled at CPAC. So really getting RAMP into a national brand and trying to move the issue forward. So I appreciate it.
So what else I would like to say about this is I feel that the war on drugs, especially with marijuana, is a very corrupting influence in our society. I think it corrupts our police departments, it corrupts our legal system. It forces us to pretend that things that are not true are true. And I think this reflects in the way policing is done these days. And I want to try to quickly relate one incident of a few friends of mine who were at a different political meeting, I believe at this very restaurant, and after they left the restaurant, they went to their car. They had a discussion in their car just a couple blocks from here, and they were, a constable went past, looked at the way they were parked, and used that as an excuse to conduct an investigative stop. They weren't driving, so as a matter of fact, they exited the vehicle and were on their way to go to their separate cars and leave the area. And they were just having a conversation in one car. And he used that as an excuse to detain everybody in the car for hours, demand their identification when he did not have probable cause to suspect a crime. And he eventually got a search warrant, searched the vehicle, and he did find something that he believed was, a substance that he could press charges with. The fallout of that is that all the individuals involved, well, not all of them, but I think three of them, spent several months with their cases working their way through the system. Two of these individuals didn't live in the city of Houston, so every time they had a court hearing, they had to drive all the way in from several counties away to make the court hearing. And the interesting thing is, the upshot of it is, because of the city of Houston's new policy on marijuana, which our DA adopted, our Republican DA adopted, because of a policy the Democratic challenger claimed that she would implement if she became elected, as sort of reaction to it, our DA, our current DA, came up with a policy that is basically catch and release. Your first Class B misdemeanor marijuana possession is on the house. So we have, technically, the only person that could have been guilty of a crime was essentially let go. After a couple court appearances, the case was dismissed, and it was dismissed because this individual passed a drug test and took some classes and signed up to do you know, some community service, and see ya, nothing on your record. It's dismissed. So there's arrest, but nothing else. The other individuals had to go through the whole 9 yards of basically hiring an attorney and fighting for their rights when no crime was committed. And this is all because our police feel entitled when they enforce these drug laws, and I believe that's a corrupting influence on our society. And for that reason alone, I would like to take a behavior that a large minority of our population engages in and move it out of the category of being a criminal offense, because it just doesn't do any good for anybody to criminalize it.
Okay, I'm gonna move us on to the next issue. I'm gonna start with Fishy here. Big one just hit up last month, the marriage ruling from the Supreme Court.
Yes, okay. I'm of two minds about this. You guys know, I'm sitting here at Blockhead Republicans. I'm not somebody who thinks you have I live in Tennessee. I believe that people are shifting in, as a population, as an American population, really rapidly on this issue because it was sold as an issue of fairness. Think about that. If it were special rights, something that's over and above what, say, other people have, it wouldn't have succeeded. The whole issue is on fairness, equity, equality. That's what they call it. Marriage equality is an issue. What has to happen now, though, is the community that has benefited from that needs to defend the people for whom that is still not something they're prepared to accept. And I'm going to say it out loud in front of everybody. If you are not also fighting for the right of people to have that religious conviction, not to force people to participate in something, but rather allow them to choose to do it, that's going to be the way that you are going to get a lot of goodwill from people that don't accept this now, that feel embattled and battered and beat up for reasons of their own, in their own minds, that they feel this thing is an encroachment upon them. I'm not going to try to explain how that happens. I don't happen to share that view. If you ask me to bake your cake, by God, I'm going to bake your cake because I love you and you're my friend, and not necessarily, you know, that's a thing. But people who objectively, conscientiously object, you must defend them and be seen to be doing it, and that should be a value all across the spectrum. Otherwise, it's going to continue to have a lot of ire and difficulty of people accepting it. Show that equality is still what you're after. Fairness is still what you're after. People's right to choose what they want to do with their lives is what the basis of the campaign was based on. So continue that value. That's what the left is not going to do. And that's why people in this room are much better at this and understanding that concept, because left activists are not going to do that at all. They are going to end up looking like they're using marriage as a weapon. You don't want that. My friend Andy Pate from the Party of Choice, which you should all check out, Andy's talked about that. If your marriage is a celebration, you want people celebrating it with you. If you're using it as a weapon, that's something else entirely. Now, the people I know, the people in this room, not people who are pugilistic about those issues. It's not like that. But there's a whole bunch of people out there for whom that is a weapon, and they want to use it as a weapon. Take that away. You know, condemn that.
Do you give that right, that conscientious objector status, to use your phrase, to government officials or private individuals?
Personally, I think if you are in a government job, you have two choices. You do what the policy is, or you resign your job. That's where I come down on it. I personally, if that's what the law is, and I have to go with the law, or I have to go with my conscience. I don't get to dictate what the law is based on what my conscience says. That's how I feel about that. But that opens up.
Private individual, we should defend if they don't want to bake our cake. You used that example.
Well, and I don't think even the Texas reaction where they were talking about clerks could refuse to do that as long as there was somebody else available to do it. I don't know the whole details of that, but I think it was that the state said that they would help defend those people, but not that they would make them keep their job. So legal battle that comes with that is very different from keeping your job if you refuse to do a job that's the state
Okay.
deems that you should do.
I'll give you that one.
Okay.
So I think a lot of libertarians and a lot of the kind of liberty side of the Republican Party has been talking about for a long time of government divorcing itself from marriage. We consider marriage a divine right from God and part of the Christian faith or another faith. Why should you have to ask the government for permission to be married in the house of God? My wife Danielle, when we got married, we had to go to some pre-marriage counseling classes in the Catholic Church, and I actually tried to engage our priest in the discussion, and he wasn't really willing to go there. But my question to him was, why do I have to go ask the government for permission to grant me a license, which you need a license to do something that would otherwise be illegal, to be married in your church? I think we can all respect the right of a civil contract to, if we happen to divorce sometime down the road and there needs to be some sort of contract to divide up that property, then maybe there is some legitimacy for some government role in marriage, but it certainly isn't at the licensing aspect. Secondly, me as a white man and my wife as a Hispanic woman, 60 years ago, would we have been granted a license or permission to be married by the state? There was a famous support case with Richard Loving, a white man that married a black woman in Virginia and basically got exiled. When he came back, they arrested him, put him in jail. And if it wasn't for the courage of a couple white attorneys to stand up for his rights, who knows where we would be as far as even interracial marriage equality. So, I can see the side of religious folks who have a religious definition of marriage and not being able to change their opinion on that. But I think, as Felicia said, there has to be respect cutting both ways. And as far as equal rights, to individuals, whether they're same sex or opposite sex, should be entitled to those equal rights.
So,
You wanted to. Wait, do you want to go next?
No, I can keep back to you. Just had someone raise their hand.
Oh.
Right, so this- Yeah.
I was just going to say that in terms of marriage, we have a secular world and we have a sacred world. And I think what some people are scared of is that with the separation of church and state, it should go both ways. The federal government has dictated that marriage is from between anyone. I think what people are worried about is that Christians are not, their rights of separation of church and state aren't going to be recognized. I actually am in favor of doing it the way in Mexico does it. Everybody has to go and get married at the courthouse or however they do it through the government, and then they take their marriage license that they've already been married and they go to whatever religious institution they'd like to have their marriage blessed in. And it's up to that religious institution whether or not they're going to bless the marriage, sacred